Well, good evening, Cedar Falls, and welcome to tonight's committee meetings. We will start with a roll call from Madam Clerk.
Schultz.
Here.
DeBoer.
Here.
Cruz. Harding.
Here.
Ganfield.
Here.
Sires.
Here.
Dunn.
Here.
Councilmember Cruz absent.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. And then first up on the docket tonight is a report from Finance and the Finance and Business Operations Committee, and we are talking tonight about retiring/expiring TIF districts and process of releasing funds, and that will be presented by Director Jennifer Rodenbeck.
Thank you. I'll just kind of hop right into it. So the purpose of why we're here tonight is just to remind everyone on May 1st, there was a motion to refer to the FBO committee discussion of retiring or expiring TIF districts in the process of releasing funds. So that's why we're here tonight. It seemed like based on the referral, it was a little more finance related. So that's why I'm giving the presentation. Some of the slides you'll see are some things that Shane, our economic development coordinator, has shown. And then obviously Shane's here too, if there is specific questions about certain developments or agreements, Shane's here too. So again, these are kind of some repeat, but just a reminder, TIF is a reimbursements. So if projects are eligible to be repaid with TIF funds, those funds are paid up front from another city source and then reimbursed through TIF. So each year we create debt obligations to the funds that are cash flowing the projects through interfund loan resolutions. So an example I gave was, if we're paying for street in a TIF district, we may pay for that out of the local option sales tax fund, and then we'll create a debt that the TIF then has to pay back that fund. So again, it's reimbursement. We expend the cost, then we get reimbursed. Every year, by December 1st, we do have to file a report to the county auditor certifying what projects are requested to be paid from the TIF fund. And then again, the county disperses those funds to the city the following budget year. So, example I gave is this December, when we have to do it by this December 1st, 12/1/23, that will be for the budget year FY25. So, July 1st, 24 to 6/30/25. The other thing that we have to do by December 1st is the city is required to file a report with the Iowa Department of Management summarizing the TIF activity for the prior fiscal year. So usually, first meeting in November, second council meeting in November, you'll see kind of all that TIF stuff coming through. It's the report we have to file with the Iowa Department of Management. It's what are we going to certify for this next year, and also those debt interloan debt instruments that I talked about. So kind of see those all come at once in November. Just kind of a summary about our TIF district. So we currently have 5 active TIF districts: College Hill, Downtown, Pinnacle Prairie, Southern, and Unified. We have had 2 other districts in the past, Foxview Residential and Walmart. Those were very short ones. They only were around for a couple years, and it's actually been quite a while since those had any activity. And then we just created the Southwest District Urban Renewal Area here a couple council meetings ago. So just to kind of really get into then what the referral was about is just want to go through each TIF district. You'll see kind of a map on your screen with it. Also in front of you is also a big map, because some of this we understand was going to be a little hard to see. So on your desk are bigger maps showing each of the TIF, just making sure I wasn't holding it upside down, TIF districts and how they correspond to the maps on the screen. So the first one, College Hill, it was established in 2011. It was designated as Blighted Area and Economic Development Area, so there's no sunset date. So far, we have had $928,000 in certified debt for projects. So those have been things like parking lot improvements. The biggie's really been Olive Street box culvert. That's kind of the big project that we've certified debt in that TIF district. So far, we've received $375,000 in TIF revenue. So you can see we still have a balance outstanding. Well, we're still owed of $553,000. But I also want to point out to people that on the CIP, when we went through the CIP, you'll see things noted in there that we expect or are eligible to be paid out of TIF. So for this TIF district on the CIP, we have about 3.7 million of committed projects on the CIP. Finish the Olive Street box cover and the West 22nd Street. So now again, those are all, that just because they're on the CIP, that just means they're eligible for that TIF district. That's what, from a financing standpoint, we think makes the most financial sense. That's why we put that source on the CIP. But again, you certify those every year, those costs in that TIF district. So for some reason you didn't want to some year, you could do that. And then just for benefit, for fiscal year 24, the year we just started, the College Hill is generating about $248,000 in revenue. So just for information. Downtown. So this was established in 1986, designated as a blighted area. No sunset date again because of its designation. We have spent so far a little over 21 million certified debt for projects. We've collected a little over 18 million in revenues, so you can see we still have a balance owed to us of a little over 3 million in that district. So, but again, CIP, just want to put out there what so far is on the CIP we have committed is $12 million of other projects. Rebates, finish the streetscape, railroad spur, Main Street reconstruction, you can kind of see all those listed on there of the ones on the CIP. Also keep in mind, there was on the unfunded list of the CIP a parking structure. So for us, we also see that if a parking structure would occur, the most sense financially would be to out of the downtown TIF. For FY24, we do have $2 million about that we're collecting in FY24 for the downtown TIF. Pinnacle Prairie, established in 2006 as an economic development area.
Excuse me, Jen.
Yeah.
Could I ask a?
Not normally. Is there a reason why we have to ask a question right now?
Well, it kind of just goes with this, and it would be easier to follow along. Is all I was thinking.
I think
It was just that how much is brought in from the downtown TIF? That's all I wondered. Because you said that the one on College Hill was 240,000 a year bringing in.
2 million is what
2
it is
million
for
a year is
FY24.
what?
It's 2 million for the downtown.
Okay, thank you. That's all.
Yep.
Sorry.
Okay, Pinnacle Prairie. So because it's economic development, it does have a 20-year expiration date. Now, of 6/30/31. Now, someone may say, well, that doesn't make sense. If it was established in 06 and it's a 20-year life, why isn't it till 31? Well, that's because we didn't certify any debt until 2010. So the clock didn't start ticking until we certified debt. Now you can see Pinnacle Prairie, 2.7 million in projects. Mainly was the Prairie Parkway extension. That was the big one that we've certified out there. We've already collected 2.6 million, so you can see we have a very small balance still outstanding for Pinnacle Prairie, but on the CIP, we do have 4 million for the Prairie Parkway and Viking Road intersection that we have on the CIP that could be committed projects for that district. This district is only generating for FY24 estimated at 67,000, but that's because we don't have very much debt. We could, like in fiscal year 17, we collected $1 million because we had a lot of debt certified. So when I say there's 67,000, I mean, there could be more, but we don't have that much debt, so we don't need that much. And then the South, established in 2018, again, an economic development area, so 20-year expiration, so 6/30/39. 1.2 million in certified debt for projects, 900,000 received in TIF revenues to pay back the debt, so a balance of 300,000. Now again, that's one, our projects out there have been Ridgeway Avenue and Cyber Lane, but you can see on the CIP there is a lot that's just kind of being planned for in terms of development of the Gibson property. Our revenue for FY24 is estimated at 318,000. For that one, and that's because that's basically the balance outstanding, like I said. So until we certify more debt, that one may all flow to the general funds if we don't have to capture the TIF. And then of course the big one, the last one, the Unified. Saved it for last just because it has kind of more pieces to it, but, so it was originally designated as an economic development area in 1990. But it has multiple establishment dates, because we have amendments, Amendment 1, Amendment 2, Northern, Unified, it all kind of goes together, so there's been multiple ones. So far, when you take the Unified as a whole, we've had 120 million in certified debt for projects. So far, 93 million has been received in TIF revenues to pay back that debt. So we have 27 million still outstanding. However, there are other things on the CIP again. Land acquisitions, Highway 58, Green Hill Road, Viking Road reconstruction. So you can see that we do still have a lot outstanding for that district. It generates for FY24 estimated at 3.4 million that we expect to collect in FY24. Now again, it has multiple dates. And also the original area in 1990 was before legislation was passed for the 20-year life. So originally, the original area in the industrial park did not have an expiration date. But when we created the unified district, then it got a 20-year life added to it. So the original area will expire in 2033. So it does have an expiration date. When it was originally created, it did not. So actually, again, there's multiple expiry dates, and again, you can kind of see those on the map in terms of the original area in 33. You can see, you know, something that was just created here recently, the way on the west has a 630-40. You can see the Unify has a 630-20, or the Northern, sorry, has 2030. Unified has that 2033. So it's varying dates based on when they were established. Oh, thanks, Jeremy. He just had it up on the screen, the map. So, so again, there are still businesses in that original area that are under the TIF, but that will expire in 2033. So I think there was maybe some questions about original area and whether it had an expiration date or not. So just kind of wanted to do a close-up. That's one of the other maps. I mean, it's on the screen here, but it's really hard to read. So in front of your desk is a large map, just to kind of show you a close-up of that original area and just some of the businesses out there, just to give you an idea of which ones we're talking about. So it kind of matches that shape on the screen, I guess, in green, the original area. So you can see some of those that are on there. But again, they have been in the TIF district since 1990, but it will expire in 33. And then we actually have already had an area that's already expired. It was amendment number 1. It expired in 2018. So you'll see that on your map in the white. I think it shows 6/30/17 was the last year, so then fiscal year 18 was the first year we didn't have that revenue coming in. So when that was released, that was $3.5 million that was getting generated by that district at the time. And so when that was released, then about 1.3 million came to the city, 1.3 million came to the schools, and then 900,000 went to the county. So that has already happened since fiscal year 18. And then one of the things that you hear us talk about in goal setting, or when we're going through our financial policies, is what are we going to do with that 1.3 million that's been released? You know, are we going to designate it? I mean, so far, policies has said we want to hold that for economic development. So actually, I just kind of copy and pasted out of the goal document in the budget on the next screen, just some of those policies about continuing to transfer TIF release funds to economic development to cash flow economic development projects, continue to dedicate TIF release dollars. So again, that's something we discuss every year in goal setting with the council to determine how you want to do that. Now, some people say, well, why do we hold that? I mean, why don't we just let it go into our general fund? And a couple of things. One, I just talked about, we still have a lot of debt out in the unified. So if the legislation would decide some year to abolish TIF, which we hear, I mean, usually every year there's legislation at the state level about TIF. okay, then at least we still have some funds that we could then pay ourselves back because we still have outstanding debt. Another reason is it does help cash flow other TIF projects. So when we decide to buy parcels of land, because that's, it's a good spot to have, and we want to add it into our unified district, we have dollars to cash flow those. Just kind of for everyone's information too, the third map on your desk, again, it's kind of right here on the screen, but on your desk, is the map of the expired area. So again, these are ones that have already, we are no longer collecting this TIF revenue anymore. It's just flowing to the school, the city, and the county. So, and again, that's been since fiscal year 18 that that's been happening. So that was just kind of about each district, the expiry dates. Obviously, just wanted to kind of summarize some of the benefits of TIF. Capture funds to do improvements in that district. Can encourage new development or redevelopment in those areas. We've already seen that. We've had businesses in our TIF districts who have done expansions and done redevelopment in their lots and at their sites. Using TIF as a funding source for project does free up sources of funding, other sources which benefit the entire community. For example, we don't have to issue bonds for debt for projects in the TIF area. If we can cash flow it ourselves and do interfund loans, we don't have to pay interest to an outside bank. We don't have fees with selling bonds, so that's a benefit. Other thing is we don't have projects on the CIP in other areas of town don't have to compete for projects in the TIF district. So if you think about a road, if we're gonna redo Viking and it can be in the TIF district, something like Union Road doesn't have to compete with it because we can use, local option sales tax or road use tax dollars for Union Road, and we have TIF money that can pay for Viking. And streets is just the easy example, but we can talk about stormwater, sewer, kind of that same thing. But I think what's always hard about TIF is a long-term investment. I mean, it is hard because we're spending money today, and it takes a while to get ourselves paid back. So it is a long-term goal. Sometimes I think we worry sometimes about the 20-year. People may think, well, 20 years, that's a long time. But we also understand just getting things going, people getting developments, getting that area. I mean, it does take a while. So 20 years can kind of go by pretty quick. So it is a long-term goal. So that's, I guess, what we had. And this was just information based on the referral. It wasn't to ask for any motion or anything tonight. And so obviously there's questions. And if I can answer it, like I said, Shane or maybe even Ron can jump in if there's questions that people have.
Thank you, Jen. Council, any questions? Yes, Councilman Schultz.
Thanks, Jen. You make it sound simple. It's a pretty complicated thing, so I appreciate your patience with explaining all that. In the area of the unified, were there existing businesses like Viking Pump or Martin Brothers or that were not in on that, or how did that work?
So on the existing original one, which is this green map, just so everyone knows kind of which one I'm talking about. So yes, I think Viking Pump, I want to say Martin Brothers were there when it was established. So they would have had a base amount that is still flowing into the general fund, because when you establish a TIF, there's that base value. And so just making it easy, if their building at that time in 1990 was valued at $1 million, that $1 million is still flowing like normal to all the entities. It's only the increased value that then the city gets to capture all of that. So if, again, if Viking Pump was $1 million then and it's $3 million now, $1 million still flowing just as its base, but the $2 million is being captured. I mean, the tax is on the $2 million, not $2 million. The tax is on the $2 million value the city's capturing.
Thank you.
Yep.
Anyone else? Yes, Councilwoman DeBur.
And Jennifer, is that where you use the word increment?
Right, tax increment finding. That's the whole idea of you have a base, you're trying to develop it, and it's that increased or increment that's generated above that base that we then get to capture. Yep.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
just to follow up on that, is that increment inclusive of inflationary growth as well as redesigned and improvement?
Well, I think I can answer that from a county. I mean, that's really the county because everyone has their assessed value. So I would assume that some of those buildings have increased in value over the years just from, again, the county assessing properties based on sales, all of that, they would have increased value. But obviously, if they also would have done an expansion, you know, increased the building size, that would have also been included in additional value. Yep.
Yes, Councilman Cruz?
Thank you. Thanks, Jen. Great presentation. Question, when you talk about the 20-year expiration, everything that's active or ongoing in there expires, or does each project have a life?
Nope, it's that area, that TIF area that expires.
So if a project started in the 19th year, you only have 1 year of TIF,
Correct. That's why we worry about that sometimes. Yeah.
unless you amend it?
Right, we could amend the area. Now that, I don't want to make that sound simple. I mean, it's, you know, because also have to remember that, let's say it was the 20 years, there were then, and we wanted to reestablish the TIF or amend it, then our base, you know, if we didn't amend, if we reestablish the TIF, our base now goes up to what our current value is, and now we're back to, again, only getting that incremented value, because I just thought this was interesting, that I went and looked back that, so in 1996, the value assessed, or taxable value out in the industrial park was 4.7 million. That was the taxable value. In 2017, the highest it was before that amended area expired, it was 273 million. So we like to think TIF has been working. If you go from 4 million to 200 and some million in value, it seems like TIF was doing what it was meant to do.
Okay, then to the point that Dustin brought up about inflation values. Our TIF in the industrial park is at 1 million threshold for a certain amount, and then 1.2, if I recall. And downtown is 200,000 to qualify for a TIF project.
Oh, that's a Shane question, maybe. I think they're asking about incentives, like what the value has to be to get incentives, right?
Basically, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so in downtown and College Hill, the typical investment is 200,000. And then in our industrial parks, it's based on, the tax abatement is based on the valuation of 1.2 million or 1 million or 1.2 or more.
Improvement.
Yes, building.
And that has stayed the same all these years, or has there been any increase with inflation as we put a new TIF out there?
That's been the policy from council for a number of years.
Okay.
Question.
Yes, Councilman Harding?
So the TIF and the incentives, they kind of go hand in hand because we use TIF to pay the incentives, but are they separate policies under our umbrella as far as the way the city views it? I mean, I know they work together.
Sure.
But, and I only ask that because if we want to look at, should we look at them separately is what I'm saying.
Right, I think tonight, I think we were trying to stick to what the actual referral was, which was about TIF districts expiring districts. I think if there's a question or council wants to talk about a policy regarding the incentives and the base value, we would probably see that as a different policy that we can have a discussion.
Okay, that's how I was seeing
Okay.
it too. I think they interrelate because
They
we
do.
use TIF dollars to pay
Right.
for the incentives, but the incentive program is a different policy.
Right.
So, thank you.
Yes, Councilman Cruz?
Thank you. So my question might not be appropriate at this time, but you talk about the base value. And then a number of months ago, I had a concern about tearing down a property to an empty lot.
Okay,
And then the TIF incremental is still on the building that was there before the tear down,
okay.
right?
I think what you're saying is if it was at 100,000 when the base was established, I think is what you're saying, right?
Like any of these
That's a
properties.
100,000 base, and if they tear it down, then you're saying if the building has to be 300,000 to get the 200,000 of increment. I think, right?
Well, say any of these properties that are in a existing TIF district, say they go out of business, sell the building, new firm comes in to buy it, demos the land, or the existing structure, and then rebuilds. So the base is still what was
100,000.
before it was demoed, correct?
Correct. I mean, correct, because the base value would have been established.
And that's-
I would agree with that. I mean, I don't think I'm saying it differently than you presented
No,
it.
no, I think,
Or
if
am I not
if you don't
understanding?
mind me jumping in,
Yeah.
I think that's one of the risks with a TIF district as well. Some communities actually have it where they don't have growth within their TIF districts, and what could actually happen is you could end up with a negative increment and in those areas. So now they don't have any growth, they don't have an increment within their tax valuation could be lower than when they established the TIF district. So,
isn't it a requirement or a pledge, I suppose, of a project to say we're going to have a new structure that's worth 2 million incrementally more, and if it doesn't hit the 2 million valuation, they don't qualify for TIF? Is that the way I understand it?
I think that's a pretty, but are you talking about the industrial park or the downtown?
Well, any of them, really. I mean, the project, they tell us we're going to build, it's going to be worth 2 million after it's done.
So I think we've got to be careful, especially, I'll use the downtown. And the reason I say that is because I think the $200,000 threshold is established in the downtown area, so we don't encourage people to tear down. So you're saying, hey, how can I add on or enhance this historic structure, as opposed to tearing down and saying, oh, for me to get any type of incentives, I have to hit a $2 million mark. So now, once you get out into the industrial park and we're saying, hey, this is more shovel-ready lots, now what we'd really like to see is $1 million or 1.2 million.
Could I jump in just, because I think I see where you're going. So we have the agreements with the developers, and if they don't hit the mark that they've agreed upon, they don't get the tax abatement.
Right.
So, but that's an incentive, not TIF. They're separate. That's what I was saying. I think some people up here are thinking that TIF and incentives are actually the same thing when they're not. They're kind of connected because we use TIF to pay for incentives, but incentives are totally separate policy.
The land.
The land, yeah, like the land we give away and the tax abatement or the tax things, those are incentives we give that we come up with a development agreement, and correct me if I'm wrong, but if they do not follow that development agreement and reach the mark, then they do not qualify for the incentive. It doesn't happen.
Is the TIF revenue then still diverted?
Well, the TIF,
Property tax
Well,
revenue?
we certify the total debt in an area. So, excuse me. So when they're at the county, Pinnacle Prairie is a good example. We don't need all the value in Pinnacle Prairie. We only needed 100,000, let's say. So they're only diverting TIF revenue of 100,000. Now, how the county, I assume they allocate that to each property then, that 100,000, and then the rest of that gets to the general funds. Does that make sense?
So then going back to the 20-year, if we still have debt, and we put out a project in the 19th year, then we're at risk of not getting paid back.
That is
We
correct.
would question
So-
whether we'd even do it, I suppose.
Right, so I think that, I know a lot of times, again, that's why the CIP, again, we always like to kind of have that plan, so it's kind of on everybody's radar, so to speak, kind of what we're thinking is out there for TIF. But I think you'll also see, like when engineering sends cover memos through for projects, they may have right in that cover memo, we plan to certify this in the unified TIF district. Just, again, to make sure everyone kind of understands that's what the plan is. By doing this, we're maybe taking a little risk, but that's also, like I talked about, before December 1st, in November, you'll see a list of, okay, these are all the projects that we spent this last year. And, whatever, since last September to this September, all the projects, and so we're gonna certify this much in our TIF district game. Additional, besides what we already have, plus these additional projects.
So then certifying means you're just validating that the developer did what they said and the projects.
No, it's more like we're telling the county what the additional debt we had this last year. So if we already have a balance of 3 million, well, I'll pick Pinnacle because it's a smaller number, so it's easier. If we have a balance of 100,000 and we went and did the new intersection out there and it cost $2 million, we're letting the county know, hey, we're certifying debt of 2 more million in the Pinnacle Prairie. So this next year, when you do all the tax calculations, you have to take that all into account to determine what's diverted or what has to be captured by that TIF district.
Councilman Ganfield, did you have a question that I saw you?
Yeah, I think my follow-on was just in regards to the risk that we open up when we have a property that say is $100,000 in value and then it's torn down. That negative increment is where's the burden bear? The city has to bear that negative increment. The property owner certainly wouldn't be assessed the $100,000 valuation when they have nothing there.
Correct.
So we're the ones taking the risk in that instance.
Right, exactly. Yep.
That was one thing I wanted to clarify. Go ahead.
Maybe I want to clarify that. I don't know how, the city doesn't really have a risk, because this happens all over town every day, you know, where a house may get tore down in a residential area. So what that means is once that house is tore down, we're just not getting property tax value out of it. Same thing within a TIF district. They tear that down, they're not getting the property tax value out of that. So there's no risk. The biggest, I think, concern would be is if you do get into a situation, and this often happens in communities with slum and blighted areas, is that your increment could go negative. And so we've talked several times about establishing TIF districts and making sure that the timing's right, so you're on that upswing and you want the momentum of development to go on.
Right, and I'm looking at it, for instance, let's just, pick a obsoleted mall potentially. Let's say it's valued at $5 million. We TIF that area, and then someone raises the entire mall. We're, as a city, still burdened with that $5 million going into the general fund, right? Like, that's already the valuation of the TIF. Let's say nothing's improved in that area, now we're basically backwards $5 million until it's improved beyond that.
That's the base, 5 million.
Well, most of our development agreements are all based on incentive type. So when a developer comes in and they say, hey, we're going to build a project and it's going to create X increment. So if they go in there and at the end of the day, if there's no increment for them to get paid back, they don't get paid back because typically their project didn't raise that type of dollar figures. So it's usually on the back end.
So then,
if I'm answering.
But then what I was thinking, this is what I was thinking when I said yes, risk. What I thought maybe you were getting at is it could take us longer to pay back any debt in that TIF. But I think what Ron's trying to say is if they would do that and there's no value and they didn't meet their agreement, we have no payment obligation to them to go certify as debt. I think that's maybe what Ron was kind of describing.
Sorry.
Yes,
I'm nerding out on this, and I really like it. And I think there's, all right, so people take the mall, okay? They can, we have no debt if they tear the mall down, whether or not it's a TIF, it doesn't matter.
Right.
The only thing we're certifying debt on is a project that the city does or an incentive we give within that. So what that means is if a developer comes in and says, they could raise the mall anytime. The only debt we're going to certify is if it's TIFed and we say we're going to give you taxes back, a tax abatement. Also, in the industrial park area where it's shovel ready, what they've said, we have all these lots that aren't developed. So the only money, the debt we have in it is the land we've purchased and the projects we've done to provide the infrastructure. So we're certifying that. So when it comes to a developer putting on, we're only certifying more debt if we're giving an abatement or a tax break. So you got to separate the way you look at this stuff, because it does go together, but like they said, it's the way what we've done as a city in there. So downtown's a great example because we did the sidewalks and we did all the infrastructure improvements, and I believe we used the TIF funding to do that, right? So we didn't have to use the general fund. So it's projects. So I don't know. I mean, I'm not trying to like.
Steal my thunder.
No, I'm sorry. I do like this stuff, and I studied a lot on TIF. But sometimes I want to make sure that we all are on the same page. That's all. So sorry if I'm mansplaining or whatever.
Madam-
Yes, Councilman Ganfield?
Yeah, I appreciate that you're nerding out on it. I am as well. I appreciate your presentation on this as well. It makes it a little bit easier to understand. So the conversation has been helpful for me. What I was wanting to talk about specifically, playing devil's advocate on that risk side. Let's, for example, say that we could pick one property only in a TIF, and it's at $1 million valuation. We set that TIF. Well, we're now splitting that 3 ways, that $1 million, until the expiration of the TIF, right? That $1 million valuation, tax dollars, still goes to the county, to the schools, and to the city.
Because it's the base, and it would work just
Right.
like any other, I mean, it worked that way before the TIF
Correct.
was created.
Now
It
let's
worked that
pretend
way.
they destroy that building and now have no taxable valuation. So they're not paying us anything of that $1 million valuation. We're now negative incremented, and we still have to pay that obligation or share that portion of the obligation with the county and city. Is that correct?
No.
No, because it's gonna just, let's maybe just take, like, let's say there was no TIF. So let's say there was a property, it was paying in all districts right now, school, city, county, just like everybody's home and everybody. Okay, if they tear down the building, then you're right, the school, the city, and the county just no longer get that money anymore. I think what you're asking is when we establish the TIF, and if it's zero value, do we still now owe the county and the school their portions? Is that, did I
Kind of.
understand that? And we don't. If there's no value and there's nothing for TIF revenue out of there, it would flow just like normal. Now granted, there's nothing to flow if it has zero value, but
Yeah.
we don't owe the school and the county that
Okay.
share of the base.
That makes sense. And
Okay,
back in the back of my mind is this idea that there are some cities that TIF their entire city,
sure, there is.
right?
Yeah.
So if there's no risk, that makes sense to them. But that's fine. I wanted to just make sure I understood the risk and who bears the burden of that risk. It's not our residents. It's not even our city if we choose not to certify the debt. So that makes a little better sense. I think one of the things that was brought up months ago was about the potential expiration that is
Right.
there for all the industrial parks, but is not there for slum and blighted areas such
Correct.
as downtown and College
Correct.
Hill. So downtown's been there since '86.
Mm-hmm.
What does that look like? How bad of an idea is that for us to expire that TIF district to send that money back into the general fund?
Well, I think what's hard is that, then to do projects in there for future, it's gonna compete with everything else on the CIP, just like we talked about. So, to expire that downtown TIF, and I use the parking ramp as a good example because it's on the unfunded list. I just use that as an example, that right now it's unfunded, and if we would expire that TIF, I'm not sure we're gonna be able to go fund a $15 million or $20 million project for a parking ramp without having that revenue to help us. Now, we can talk about private partnerships, we can talk about issuing debt for it, but we're also gonna be capped on how much GO debt we're gonna do for a parking ramp. So that's the concern when we hear about expiring a TIF, but then we still want projects done. It's like you can't have it both ways, or you're gonna have to sacrifice other projects on the CIP to pay for those projects downtown.
And maybe Jen can touch on this a little bit, but we already do release monies back into the general fund within the, would you touch on that a little
Sure.
bit, Jen?
So we could actually generate $2.5 million in the downtown TIF, but we, for the last couple of years, and that's been in the certifications that come through council, we release 500,000. So we only collect 2 million. We could collect the whole 2.5 million because we have enough debt down there, but last couple of years, we've allowed at least a portion of it to flow into people's general funds.
When you say we, you say the city.
Correct. So when we certify, so in November, because it's by December 1st, when those come through council, if you look on the downtown certification form we have to submit, it'll show releasing, like we can decertify the amount, or we'll put right on there, we only want to collect $2 million. We don't want the full 2.5. Now, that's been a policy decision. You wouldn't have to do, I mean, you could do 2.5 million and collect it all in a year.
Jen, I'm sorry.
Yes, Council.
So when we released that, that also meant that we released it to the school and the county.
Yep, it's not quite one-third, 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 but it's just kind of the easy way to explain it. Yep.
Councilman Ganfield, did you have something?
Sure, thank you. I think I just want to make sure that there are, I mean, it's short-sighted gains for potential long-term losses. If
Right.
we decided to release 2 million one year for, let's say, tax abatement purposes, and say, hey, let's take the burden off because it's a record inflation year, for example, that could then cause us problems down the line. Is that what we're saying? But it is feasibly possible.
Correct. You
To
could
not certify
decide
some
not
of
to
it, yeah.
certify or decertify all the debt you have. Again, I think our concern is if we want to continue to keep doing projects down there, it is the thing that makes the most financial sense. And I think, not picking on downtown for a little bit, but I'll pick Unified. Again, I know it's a burden on the school and the county. They talk about, there's money they could have, but again, we look at it, it's been working though. I mean, there was $3 million released in fiscal year 18 because we had an area, it hit the 20 years, it was released. And it wouldn't have had any value or very little value if we hadn't developed it and made it grow to that much. So they get the benefit, but you're right, they gotta be kind of in it for the long term, not just, hey, in 2 years, now I'm mad that it's in a TIF. They understand it's a long term.
Right, and we still have the jurisdiction to be able to do that non-release for 1 year without breaking the TIF district in total, correct? We could still
Correct. Now
re-pick up our certified.
Right, now we lost a year. In our 20-year, we just lost a year by doing that. So, if it's gonna expire in 33 and we don't do any this year, okay, that's one year less we have. And I think what's also hard I'll pick the school and county, is let's say the next year you do certify it all again and you capture that, now they've just lost that. I mean, they relied on it for a year, and then the next year they're gonna see, using the example of the TIP, they just now lost 1.3 million in their general fund. The school, they had it this year, they didn't have it, and now we certify again, they lost it. So I think even for the school and county, they probably wouldn't want to see those big, peaks and valleys either of doing that.
I'm going to say something real quick, because along those lines, when I think about, I've heard, and I know just from the way things work, that what helps fund our schools are students. So I think it's a good thing to maybe recognize that what brings a lot of folks to live here is the investment that we've made in our community, not only in our downtown, but also, and in College Hill, but also in our industrial parks. And so I think that there's the investment, right? Like, we're bringing people here. We're bringing people here to live, to work, and to play. And the investment is there. So again, the school is getting something from the investment. And it's kind of, I don't want us to think that the school's not getting something out of it. I think that's a easily argued point. Councilman Schultz, I think you had something to say.
That was it. That's
Okay.
kind of the tertiary effects of this development too. There's people that work there. There's other businesses that do business with these businesses that aren't in the TIF district that are influencing our population and influencing a flow of funds into our city and our county from that source in the first place. So.
Sure.
Yes, Councilman Cruz.
Thank you. So when we keep the funds within our Economic Development Fund, that's through the whole city. It's not just assigned to each TIF area that generated the excess?
Correct, we just
can-
call it our
okay.
Economic Development Fund.
Okay.
Yep,
I thought maybe so.
yep.
Then, going back to the slum and blighted, the name, implies, if you look at the definition, it's pretty dismal and so on. Once it's established, it's really kind of irrelevant that it was started as a slum and blighted. Basically, it's just an ongoing
Correct.
regular TIF. So the
Correct.
fact that downtown is no longer slum and blighted, far from it really, that doesn't mean anything.
Right, but I think, from a financial thing is that, for us, again, back to if we release it, Mr. Ganfield's questions about releasing it. You know, it's kind of one of those, it's like, you feel like once you've released it, you've probably committed to releasing it for a while. You know, again, because you're going to lose years, plus the school and county have started to rely on that revenue. And again, then I think we're back to, again, like I'll pick downtown. Okay, then if we're going to do projects in the downtown, we're probably going to have to prioritize them again against other projects on the CIP, whether it's streets, sewer, stormwater, whatever.
So the debt service, or excuse me, the debt that the city takes on, there's no set schedule to pay it back? It's just sort of it could be lump sums, excess?
Sure, so, in the budget, so on page, sorry, I don't know the page number off the top of my head, but in the budget,
I'd be
on
impressed if you
page,
knew the pages.
you know, probably a month ago I would have, when we were, 2 months ago, in the heart of the budget season, but I moved on to audit now. So on 3-36 and 3-37, we kind of outline what, on those charts, what we expect to have a revenue each year and who we're going to pay back. In other words, are we going to pay back the Economic Development Fund, the Sewer Fund, the Local Option Sales Tax Fund? We kind of outline that for Downtown Unified because those are the biggest ones.
It's not like a 15-year mortgage or something? No, it's just, okay, got it.
Nope, and all we're worried about is just the expiration dates. You know, it's who do we need to get paid off before it expires?
Okay.
Who, meaning ourselves, but which funds? Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, any further council questions?
Madam Chairman,
Yes, Councilman Sires.
I'll make it short. I think every neighborhood would like to have a TIF district because then their taxes stay right there. And the issue I have with a TIF district is the fact that we, as taxpayers in normal residential areas, are paying for the maintenance, the snow plowing, et cetera, on these TIF districts. They ought to at least pay their own way, and we should have some sort of schedule, I believe, that they would end up getting paid off. It's nice to run up a big fund in those things, but we're cheating the county. And also the state has to backfill that school money. So to me, and I always wonder why Pinnacle Prairie got a big boost like that, but it doesn't matter, it's over. That started in 2006. But I think we need to look to end some of these TIF districts and get that money back in the coffers of all the city people so it benefits all of us. That's all.
I want to reply to that. So earlier it was said, and I'll say it again, that if the projects or the money that's utilized from the TIF district if it's going to pay for something in the TIF district, then it's not competing with, say, Union Road or another project. Either way, projects need to be paid for. The tax base is benefiting all citizens of our city, and if something in the TIF district, like the downtown sidewalk project and all the infrastructure, if that wasn't being paid for by the TIF district, it would have had to come from the general fund. So either way, it's being paid for. It just isn't having to come from our general fund, which frees up other monies for your neighborhood and my neighborhood and all the neighborhoods that are not in a TIF district. Is that correct, or did I get that wrong?
Yeah, that's why we talk about it benefits the whole community, just because then they don't have to compete
Right.
with projects. Yeah.
Right.
Madam Chair,
Yes, Councilman Sires.
I disagree. That's all.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Councilman Sires.
Cruz.
Sorry.
So
Cruz.
the previous existing base is generating the tax revenue, which would contribute to the maintenance and snow plowing in the streets. I mean,
Correct.
it's
Correct.
one half the other, possibly? I don't know.
Well, and I think, for us, from a policy decision, we haven't paid for operating costs out of a TIF district because we know there's an expiry. It's kind of like not using one-time dollars for operating cost. And so for us, we've chosen just to do the capital costs out of our TIF. We have a project, we certify that, we do that. So we chosen really as a policy not to
So the
do
maintenance is
operating
not-
costs. But you're right,
yeah.
the base amount is coming into our general fund.
Maybe one other thing to look at when you're looking at that is if we're going to do the same amount of projects but without TIF districts, what you end up looking at is the projects within the TIF districts, we're going to have to raise through property taxes 2/3 more because we talk about a third, a third, a third. Well, all of a sudden, in those TIF districts, we're able to capture 2/3 of that wouldn't normally be generated through property taxes.
Yes, Councilwoman DeBoer.
Just one follow-up question to what Dave asked. He talked about the school
Right.
being backfilled. Are they backfilled at 100%, or do they get a percentage, and then when it expires, they get the remaining? Or is it done 100% backfill?
Sure. So for schools, I reached out to the schools just to make sure I knew exactly, because I knew that for us, when we certify our TIF debt and we talk about the rate in the TIF district, it's not the full amount. So I'll pick, if the tax rate in Cedar Falls, based on the schools, the county, and the city, is $34, our TIF rate is only $28 because we subtract our debt service, we subtract the school's debt service, we subtract the PEPL levy for the schools as well. They're not impacted by TIF. I mean, that's by law that those aren't, charged to the TIF. And then their $5.40 levy is what is then backfilled from the state for the school. So if they have some additional levies, they aren't necessarily backfilled by the state. So it's not 100% that the state backfills the school. Does that make sense? It's their $5.40 levy. Other levies aren't impacted by TIF, and then they may have other ones that, maybe they levy for something else because they, can increase their rate to help cover revenue, but the state doesn't backfill that.
Okay, any further questions before we move on to the next part of tonight's committee meeting? All right, thank you very much, Director Rodenbeck, for that information and for answering our questions. And we will turn it over to Public Works Committee, which Councilman Schultz.
All right, we have one item on the agenda tonight for Public Works Committee. Looks like Mr. Wiki is setting up to discuss the pedestrian crosswalks on University Avenue, Center Street, and 12th Street. Whenever you're ready, Mr. Wiki.
Okay, good evening, Mr. Chair, Public Works Committee members, city staff. Tonight's presentation that I'm going to give is on a review of pedestrian crosswalks, University Avenue and Center Street. This is from a council referral back in February. These two crosswalks, just to give you a little bit of background, they're currently have rectangular rapid flashing beacons installed for driver awareness. This presentation is being presented for informational purposes. There's no council action that is required for this. This is just for information for you guys to have. To start off, I just kind of want to go through different types of crosswalks that we have. There's essentially 4 different types of crosswalks. You have uncontrolled and unmarked, and those are typically, you see these commonly at local residential street intersections where you have low speed and low traffic volumes. Next, you have uncontrolled and marked. That's where they're marked with either signage or pavement markings or both. And these are typical of mid-block crossings or crossings with higher pedestrian volumes. These are the type of designated crosswalks where you might see an RRFB used. Next are controlled and unmarked crossings. These are crossings that are either stop or signal controlled, but they are unmarked. And you can see these downtown Main Street crossings, at those intersections where they are controlled with traffic signal. There's not necessarily signs or pavement markings to indicate that pedestrian crossing. And then finally, we have controlled and marked, and these are crossings with stop or signal controlled, and they're also signed and marked. And you'll see these typically at areas where there is higher speed and higher volume roadways, such as our collectors and our arterials. So the intent of rapid flashing beacons are used in combination with pedestrian schools or trail crossings to warn, crossing warning signs to improve safety and accessibility at uncontrolled marked crosswalks. RRFBs are warning signals intended to draw motorist attentions to pedestrians that are entering the crosswalk. RRFB is an option at many types of established pedestrian crossings, such as school crossings is a good example. RRFBs have shown that they can yield up to as high as 98% in motorist yielding rates. RRFBs are particularly effective at multi-lane crossings where speed limits are less than 40 miles an hour. Let's see, this next slide shows the current use of RRFBs that we currently have in the city. And that list just shows you where we either currently do have RRFBs or where we will be installing RRFBs. 27th Street at Panther Parkway and Main Street near the 9th Street. Those are two projects that are currently under construction, and upon completion of construction, those two areas will have RRFBs. In addition to that, we have the two that are on Union Road, Viking Road, Round Street, University Avenue, Center Street. So those are all the current areas of RRFBs in the city. I'd just like to know, the Federal Highway does note that the overuse of RRFBs does diminish their effectiveness. So the more that we put out there and the more that we have, motorists kind of get a little bit immune to them, and so they lose their effectiveness the more that we put out there. This next slide is it's just it's a short video, kind of goes through the rapid flashing beacons a little bit, how they operate and how they are used. So I'll just play this video and let you watch that.
Making them highly visible when competing with other traffic signals, headlight glare, or wet roads. RRFBs can easily be added to existing school crosswalk sign poles or installed as part of a new crosswalk installation and can be powered by solar. The placement of the RRFB light bar can vary, and again, depending on the roadway design, uni or bi-directional light bars and signs may be required. The minimum size of the rectangular-shaped yellow indications, each with an LED array-based light source, must be 5 inches wide by 2 inches high at minimum. These must flash rapidly in a wig-wag plus simultaneous flash pattern, in sync with all other RRFBs at the crossing. The MUTCD advises that the downward arrow plaque be mounted below the pedestrian crossing sign at a minimum of 7 feet from the bottom of the sign to the sidewalk. RRFBs are dark until pedestrian actuation. Pedestrians may activate the RRFB via passive detection or via a push button. R10-25 signs should be installed to explain to users the purpose and use of the pedestrian push button. To comply with the Americans with Disabilities Act, the push button should be installed at a height of approximately 3.5 feet and no higher than 4 feet. This treatment is invaluable for increasing driver yield rates in unmarked mid-block crosswalks near school zones, keeping children and other pedestrians safe. Check out the rest of this video series to learn about other possible school zone treatments. Visit our website and feel free to contact us for more information.
I just have to let the video run out completely to move on to the next slide here. There we go. Okay, so when we evaluate the use of RFBs, there's several criteria that we sort of consider, things that we want to look at. The main components of these are going to be traffic volumes and pedestrian volumes, but the other things that we also look at are the traffic gaps, the speed limits, is it a school route, some of the site distance, crash data, the width of the roadway, cost associated with it, and engineering judgment. Now getting on to are crossings that, that was referred. Here's Center Street, just showing the existing conditions, looking both north and looking south. As you can see, the pedestrian crossing signs on both sides of the street, along with the RRFB. Also included with this crossing is that you can see off to the side on that right-hand picture there, the in-street pedestrian yield sign. Those we've used those, and they've been pretty effective.
Mr. Wiki, this is at Green Street?
This is at Green Street.
Okay.
Yep. This RFB was installed as part of the Center Street Rec Trail project in 2018, and it's a school crossing for the North Cedar Elementary. Next is the University Avenue crossing. Here you can see the pedestrian crossing. This is facing west. This is at near the John Deere dealership. What used to be Old Dallas Drive is where this was installed as part of that University Avenue project. As you can see, there's a center refuge because this is a divided street, and so pedestrians can use that center island as a refuge. And that's just showing the crossing facing the other direction. This wasn't part of the referral, but every year we generally get a request at this intersection for an RRFB. So wanted to include it in this part of this presentation just for discussion purposes. This is 12th Street at Quail Ridge, and you can see this is what the existing intersection and the crossing looks like currently facing each direction. So when we look at requests like this, what we first want to do is we want to compile some background data. So we'll get the crash data, we'll look at the pedestrian counts, and also look at the traffic volumes. So this was just some of the data that we collected when we were reviewing these crosswalk areas. So we did pedestrian counts on multiple days and at multiple times, trying to capture, you know, those kind of those peak times when pedestrian volumes might be the heaviest. And that table just kind of shows you where we kind of landed with that data collection. What we discovered, what we found was that at both Center Street and University Avenue, the traffic volumes coincided with a gap time that allows pedestrian to enter that crosswalk to be a gap time that doesn't allow a real good safety measure for pedestrians to cross without it being a protected crosswalk. And what we found is that on 12th Street, there was more than adequate time for pedestrians to be able to cross that intersection in that crosswalk safely because there was adequate gap time to make that crossing. The other thing with this, with all three of these areas was the crash data that we collected, and the crash data was 0 at all three of these. University Avenue did have 3 crashes within the last 5 years, but none of them were related to the crosswalk. These are all 3 of them at University were people merging into another lane and bumping into a car that was already in that lane. This data goes back 5 years, and like I said, there's been 0 accidents concerning pedestrians at any of these crossings. So for the 12th Street and Quail Ridge, there are proposed improvements that we can have out there. Short of having an RRFB, we can have yield to pedestrian signs, we can improve the pavement markings, have that in-street yield to pedestrian sign, which is shown to be pretty effective. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend a RFB at this location, again, because it goes back to there's adequate crossing time versus the vehicle gap time to make that crossing. But we can do things to improve that crossing, such as these improvements that I'm proposing here. That just shows you kind of overhead, some advanced signing to show that the crossing is up ahead. In addition to that, we do have these pamphlets that are available downstairs in our area down there where you can collect, and it's just a pamphlet that folds out and it gives you more information and more education on RRFBs in general. So that's my presentation. I'll entertain any questions.
All right, thank you, Mr. Wiki. Is there any questions? Councilman Burr.
I noticed the one on University Avenue, and you mentioned it, that they flash a white light. And I have seen times when I see vehicles stop on University Avenue, and I've seen times when vehicles go straight through it with the flashing white light. Is there any reason they don't maybe flash a yellow and then a red to get cars to stop?
So the way that these RFBs are set up, they're set up to have those white lights to flash in the manner that they do flash. And it's supposed to mimic like an emergency type response vehicle. But they're not, we don't want to copy with the red and white or red and blue flashers, but the intent is to mimic that.
So does a vehicle, are they supposed to stop? Or if the people are not crossing, are they supposed to stop or not?
If there are pedestrians in the crosswalk, then yes, motorists have to yield to those pedestrians in the crosswalk. If it's flashing, but there aren't pedestrians in the crosswalk, cautiously they can proceed through that, although I wouldn't recommend that because you never know where a pedestrian might be coming from, because it's not flashing just to flash. Somebody had to actuate the button to make it flash. So that means there's a pedestrian somewhere in the area if you don't see them directly in the crosswalk at that time.
Mr. Schrage, I think I recall you were going to do some research on the red lights.
Yeah. From the MUTCD, we looked into the replacing the amber bulbs with red bulbs, and that's not allowed due to that. That insinuates a traffic law then to be stop, and that's not allowed to replace those with red.
Okay, thank you. I think, Daryl, you were up
Okay.
next.
Thank you. So over my tenure, I've had a number of concerns brought to me about Union Road, similar to the 12th Street, and crossing, and a desire to put traffic calming. I've not seen that I'm aware of in the city any flashing speed limit signs where it's a posted speed limit, right below it, it'll have a little silent, or it's not flashing, and if you're over a certain speed, over 5 over, and then it starts flashing what you're doing, and then if you go too fast, 10 over maybe, then it's like, slow down. In my recent travels across the country, I see tons of those popping up more than I ever used to in the past. Some of them, instead of a white flashing light, they have red and white to signify, police. I think
So we'll go ahead, Daryl, quick, and we'll finish this up with the relevance to the crossing. Relevance to the crossing?
On 12th Street and existing Union Road. I mean, we're talking about pedestrian crossing. And the concern with pedestrian crossing is you can't get across the street because of the speed of the traffic and the gaps in the spacing of the vehicles. If we would install flashing speed limit signs in select places in the city to slow the traffic or make them more aware that the speed limit is 35 and not 45 and accelerating as you leave town, do we not look at that in our public works? I mean,
I would say I had firsthand experience when I was still in engineering that we researched those, and I even went as far as gotten some quotes on different areas. A lot of the studies have shown, obviously, they'll work similar to the speed trailer. You can put the speed trailer out there for a couple weeks. That'll solve the issue, but in 6 months, everyone understands what that sign's there for and just continues on.
Well, it always causes me to pause when I see one flashing at me, and whether that slows me down a mile or two, that gets you within a realm. I mean, it alerts you because you could be driving and daydreaming into a town, and you don't really notice where the 55 goes to 45 or 35, and it would be relevant, especially in North Cedar. So.
Thank you. And Mr. Harden.
My question kind of doubles back to Susan. If it's flashing, obviously it has to be activated by a pedestrian. What's the length of time that these are set to flash once it's activated? Do you know?
So
30 seconds?
I might be able to jump in here. It probably depends on the roadway width. I mean,
Yeah.
we go as far as there's tables that generate whether an adult or child walking speed 2.5 feet per second, 3 feet per second. Is the roadway 30 feet wide, 45 feet wide? That determines the length of time that the flash will go. And obviously it's well beyond that walking pace that we use in the chart. Most times it's 30 to 45 seconds, depends on.
So if you have someone pretty quick jet across the street after they press it, they could be
Still be flashing and they
for a
down the
while and they're
sidewalk.
down the sidewalk. Okay. I was just curious more than anything. Thanks.
Other comment? Mr. Sires.
One quick question. You said that if it's on a route to a school, that changes what kind of signal you could have there? Because the one on 12th Street in Quail Ridge goes to the junior high, where the kids would cross there headed to Holmes Junior High.
So if it's a designated safe route to school, and that crossing is in that designated safe route to school, then it's considered a designated school crossing.
So where do we get that designated? Who does that?
So we have a safe routes to school Intercog puts out as part of their transportation plan. And I would have to double check, but I don't believe that crossing is considered a school crossing.
Because that is the only one that would draw out of that big neighborhood. It is quite large right there to cross 12th Street, and then it's not very far, 6 blocks maybe to the junior high. If we could check into that, that'd be great.
Yeah, I can do that.
Thank you.
Other? Okay. Well, if there's no further, I'll take comments from the audience if there's any to be had. You have one? Come on up, sir. And just name and city, I believe.
You got it. Good evening. My name is Dan Pickar, and I live in the Quail Ridge area, 2610 Feather Ridge Drive. And thanks for looking into all this and getting all the information for the council to make informed decisions. Number one, and I'm glad you found the counts and the times.
Sir, can you speak into the mic so we can make sure?
Yeah,
Thank you.
I'll do that. I'm glad you found the counts and the times. When you bring up the slide about the counts from 7:45 to 8:45 a.m., that's a fine slide. School starts at Holmes at 8 o'clock, to my knowledge. So if you're walking from Quail Ridge to Holmes or the Hanson, the elementary school right there, I would say you're likely going to cross at 7:45 or prior to. So I would guess the numbers would be a little bit higher for pedestrian crossing. I've watched a line of cars, including me. I was about the fourth one back, stop for a young man, probably 10, 12 years old. The line of cars had stopped for him to cross from Birdsall to come across into the neighborhood. He made it but the F-250, that lane did not stop, and he kind of had kept piling right through the intersection. The 12-year-old made it. Unfortunately, he had about a 7- and a 6-year-old. They had smartly watched and stopped on the Birdsall side. So that was a very close call, in my opinion, if those kids hadn't had stopped and watched the older gentleman go through. I guess the only thing too, and Dave, you had kind of said something about speed limits, or maybe Daryl in that area, getting people to slow down. One of my concerns probably my largest concern is the speed limit. It is 45. It's 45 miles an hour for some reason. I don't know why. To me, that's a dangerous speed. And I think your time intervals would probably help a little bit more if we'd already had people slowed down to 35. I guess those are some points I was trying to make, is we can just get it down to 35. I think that would solve a few other problems. People that might still speed. I don't necessarily want them looking at a flashing sign over here to let them know how fast they're going when you got an 8-year-old crossing the road, but you know, something's got to help. It's not a great intersection. I cross it quite a bit, but not daily, but almost on a daily basis twice. So that's
Thank
all.
you. What was your first name again?
It's Dan.
Dan, thank you very much for your comments. I wonder if Mr. Wiki could come back up and refresh us on the speed. We just did a speed study on a referral from last year in that area. Do you recall some of that information from that speed study?
So we did complete that study last year, and I don't recall the exact numbers, but I do know that the speeds that we compiled out there were within 5 miles of the posted speed limit.
And could you refresh me on it goes from 25 to 35 to 45 in that stretch. Where does 45 start? Does it start before this intersection or after it?
It starts before then. I'd have to double check exactly where it starts, but it is further to the east. I think just past.
Be Barnett Drive.
Yeah, it's just past Barnett. I think.
Just past Barnett. Okay. Well, that's maybe, if there's any other discussion up here, I'd certainly look for your recommendation to take effect of making those changes to that intersection as a first step to put the signage up to mark the intersection and to put up the center yield to pedestrian sign. Is that your intentions?
Yeah.
Councilman Schultz?
Yes.
Can, just for my own refresher and for the public, when we're talking about speed limit, how do we determine, why is it 45 there? Like, what's that formula look like? Or why is it 45 and not, why don't we just make it 35? Or help me understand that, please.
So when the road would have been originally designed, it would have had a design speed with it, and it would have taken in several factors. It would have been a more rural area at the time, no curb and gutter. It's I believe it's a collector street. So, all those different factors, was probably what determined what that posted speed limit was going to be in that section.
Sure. So how do we get, how do we make sure that that's still the right speed, or what determines when we possibly, lower the speed, or how is that monitored?
So when we do our traffic studies, what we look at is what the 85th percentile speed is. The 85th percentile speed is a speed that 85% of drivers deem is a safe speed to travel at. So if drivers feel that posted 45 is too fast, they'll automatically adjust, and they would drive slower if they felt that wasn't a safe speed to travel at.
Sure. Okay. And then just kind of along the same lines, what's the risk if we lowered the speed when the data is not showing that it should be lowered? Or, yeah. So if council just said, hey, let's make it all 25 or 35, what's the risk of doing that?
So you don't want to arbitrarily just lower the speed for the sake of lowering the speed. I think some of the risk that comes with that is that, again, it goes back to that 85th percentile speed. That's what motorists are used to traveling. That's what they feel is a safe traveling speed. And if you lower it down to, say, 35, then it becomes very difficult to monitor that or to enforce that. So, you know, people are going to drive what they're going to want to drive. And if they feel like that safe speed is 40, 42, 43, 45, they're not going to drive 35.
Mr. Wiki, what was your decision on going with the recommendations that you are looking at with the painted intersection, the yield sign in the middle, the warning signs ahead, and not going with the rapid flashing beacon?
So there's, number one, there's a cost involved with the rapid flashing beacon. Those cost about $12,000 each to put in. Signage and paint is relatively cheap compared to that. We could really increase in visibility with the improved pavement markings and the additional signage. There was, based on our data that we collected, there was adequate gap times in the traffic to allow a pedestrian to enter that crosswalk and make it across that crosswalk safely. So those were kind of the deciding data points that I took.
Okay. To Dan's comment on the time of day that we made the assessment of the crossings, with those particularly, I was looking at the ones on Center Street too. They seem to be from, I believe, 1:30 to 2:30 or when, and it was, I was kind of curious on the one date if it was happened to be a weekend, because that is a school crossing, but there was, you know, 10, 12 crossings, and this one was low too. Have you had other observation when it's before 8 o'clock, when Hanson and Holmes students would be crossing there?
So we tried to capture the times when we felt there'd be the highest pedestrian volumes. So that's what we did try to capture. I know the one Center Street time did coincide with school letting out. So it captured those kids crossing that intersection.
Okay. Mr. Harding.
Just had a couple quick ones. Do we not have technology available to, you know, how we have a speed or counter for going across cars? We have a, is there any sort of technology out there just to put on the crosswalk that like allows us to know when a pedestrian crosses? I don't know if that exists or not. Or are we
like a 24-hour count?
Yeah, to get a 24-hour count. Is that possible or not?
To get, well, our data collectors that we have does collect for, we can set it out for as long as we want, and it continuously collects traffic data.
But just pedestrian.
But we
That's what I
don't
was curious.
have, we'd have to set up like a camera to try to capture something like that.
I'd be interested to see what the, you know, if it was possible to capture 24 hours on a school day when school gets back in. I don't know if that's insanely expensive, and do a time lapse and count. I don't know, maybe someone, I don't know. Just a thought. I'd be curious about that. I do like the idea of the extra paint and the yield sign. So my last question would be, would it be possible to move, how far is Barnett? You said, is it possible to just move, since that speed limit jumps up as you continue to travel, would it be possible just to move the 45 past that, or is that just not going to do anything? I'm guilty of just driving, and I probably couldn't tell you my speed ever. I just kind of drive, and that's not good, probably. But I would say I'm a cautious my wife calls me an old man driver. So I'm not speeding around town. But I guess my question is, could we push it back? Would that help? Would that be possible, or is that just inviting danger?
I guess I can provide a little bit of history on the entire corridor from Hudson Road to Union Road. I know I've personally been involved in probably 3 of the speed studies. When Ron was city engineer, I found some information from 2007. I know it was studied in 7, 13, 18, and then here recently. Most of the data is very close to each of those 5-year increments. Just west of Hudson Road, it starts out as a short 25-mile-an-hour zone, then goes to a 35-mile-an-hour zone, and then approximately at Barnett continues west at a 45-mile-an-hour zone. Most of the concerns have been in the 25-mile-an-hour zone because vehicles are going 35 to 40 miles an hour. And obviously, we don't want to raise the posted speed limit in that area, but it all goes back to the roadway characteristics, how far the homes are set back from the curb, all of those things that make the driver want to drive faster. So I guess to answer your question, likely not going to do much.
I had a feeling. That answers it. I would be curious. I don't know. Like I said, we want to talk later about a camera.
Any other? Mr. Cruz?
Thank you. Mr. Wiki, the Center Street data collection was at Green Crossing?
Green Avenue, correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, with that and any other comment, we'll close this out with Mr. Wiki. What's your timeline on the 12th Street?
I can discuss that with operation and maintenance, but I don't think it'd be a real long turnaround time.
Okay. Thank you. With that, we'll close this out.
Thank you.